A man is standing in his own backyard holding a garden hose, not moving. Water running over his shoes, he doesn't notice. He's watching something on the other side of the fence, and whatever it is, it has his complete and total attention. Then she turns around, their eyes meet across the fence. Hers drop to the water pooling at his feet. Slow, deliberate. Then back up to his face, a long pause, 4 words come across the yard like a door swinging open. If you want to look, the hose slips. Water sprays his ankle. He doesn't move. Because here is the thing about a man who has spent 2 years making himself small enough that nothing good could find him. The moment something does, he doesn't know whether to reach for it or run. My name is Owen Calloway, 36 years old. I own a house in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a street with old oak trees and front porches and neighbors who wave without stopping. I run a small contracting business out of a truck and a laptop. I wake up at 6, I make coffee, I go to work, I come home. I do not complain about this life. I just don't feel much of it anymore. That's the part I never said out loud, not to my sister Diane, not to anyone, really. 2 years after my divorce was finalized, I had rebuilt everything that mattered on paper. The business was steady, the house was clean. I slept without waking up at 3 in the morning with that chest pressure that used to feel like guilt and eventually just felt like weather. I was fine, completely, thoroughly, absolutely fine. The kind of fine that sits in a chair on a Saturday morning with coffee and realizes it has no idea what it actually wants to do today, or tomorrow, or in general. That was my life when Nora Ashby moved in next door. It was a Saturday in late May. I know because I was power washing the driveway, which is what I do when I have energy but no direction. The truck pulled up around 9, white moving truck, mid-sized. Not a full move, more like a carefully selected escape. I noticed the 2 teenage-looking guys who climbed out of the cab and immediately looked at each other like they had lost a bet. I noticed the boxes stacked in the back, then the dog jumped out, golden retriever, big one. The kind of dog that has never once in its life experienced a doubt. He hit the ground and came straight across the yard at me like we had an appointment. I turned off the pressure washer. The dog stopped 3 feet away, sat down, and looked at me like I was supposed to know what came next. Then a voice from the direction of the truck, Murphy. That is not our yard. She was climbing out of the passenger side. Brown hair clipped up at the back in a way that had started as something intentional and then given up halfway. Paint on her jeans, old paint, the kind that becomes part of the fabric. A grey t-shirt. Sunglasses pushed up on her head. She looked at me, then at Murphy, then back at me. I'm so sorry. He has a spatial interpretation problem. Does he think this is his yard? He thinks everything is his yard. Philosophically speaking, Murphy wagged once unbothered. Spiritually secure, Owen Calloway. Nora Ashby. She crossed the grass with her hand out. Her grip was direct, not trying to prove anything. Just present. I promise he's not always like this. I looked at Murphy, who had moved to investigate my garden hose with the focus of a detective. What is he usually like? She thought about it. Worse, honestly? That was the first time I heard her laugh. Quick! Almost surprised herself with it. Then the 2 teenagers called from the truck in the specific tone of people who want to establish immediately that this was not their idea. And Nora turned back toward the chaos and left me standing in my driveway with a golden retriever sitting on my foot. Murphy looked up at me. I looked down at him. You can't stay, I told him. He wagged. I went back to power washing, but I turned the machine down a little. The first week was small things. The kind that happen between neighbors before either person decides whether the other one is worth the energy of actual conversation. A wave in the morning, a nod at the mailbox. A brief exchange about which side the recycling truck comes from. Tuesday, I told her when she asked. Actual Tuesday? She said, neighborhood Tuesday. Which means sometime between 11 at night and 7 in the morning. She considered this. So basically set an alarm and hope. Basically, good system. It's held for 6 years. That got a small smile. The kind she gave when something landed but she wasn't going to perform a reaction to it. I went back to my side of the fence. I did not think about her for the rest of the day. Fine, I thought about her once. Twice at most. The second week she painted her front door. I came home on a Wednesday afternoon and stopped in my driveway longer than I planned to admit. The door was green. Not a safe green, a deep committed, this is a decision green. The kind of color that doesn't apologize for itself. She was on the porch with a brush, a drop cloth, and a streak of paint across her left cheek that she hadn't noticed yet. Murphy was supervising from the top step with the authority of a contractor. I got out of my truck, walked to my front door, paused. "That's a strong color," I said. She turned around, looked at the door. Back at me, "The house needed a decision," she said. I didn't have a response for that, so I nodded and went inside. But I stood in my kitchen for a minute after. The house needed a decision. I looked around at my walls. Beige, deliberate, non-committal beige. The color of a man who hadn't wanted anything strongly enough to risk being wrong about it. I got a beer and stopped thinking about that immediately. By the third week, we had graduated to full sentences. She was a graphic designer, remote work, moved from Richmond. Her sister lived 20 minutes east, which was part of the reason for Charlotte. The other part she said she would explain later, which was the kind of answer that makes a person want to ask the wrong questions at the wrong time. I told her I ran a contracting business, residential and commercial both, though I preferred residential. At least with houses you could see what you were fixing. She liked that answer. I could tell because she looked at me a half-second longer than the response required. That was the Thursday of the third week. Friday night she was in her backyard trying to hang string lights. I could see this from my side of the fence. I wasn't watching. I was watering the herb planters my sister had given me as what she called a healthy coping mechanism, and what I called proof that Diane had a very specific sense of humor. The basil was doing well. The rosemary had opinions. The thyme had given up entirely. I was not paying attention to next door, except I was. Nora had one end of the lights looped around the pergola post. The other end was tangled around her forearm. Murphy was sitting on the extension cord like he had claimed it in battle and was prepared to defend his position. She stretched up to hook a strand over the beam, missed, caught it again, muttered something I couldn't hear. Then she turned her head and looked directly at me over the fence. I froze. The hose was still running, onto my shoe. My shoe and the ground around it were completely saturated. I had been standing in one place long enough to create a small personal marsh. Nora's eyes dropped to the water pooling around my feet, came back up to my face. One corner of her mouth moved. "If you want to look," she said, "just ask." The hose slipped in my hand, sprayed my ankle. Excellent, a truly dignified showing from all parties. I turned off the hose, set it down, straightened up with the specific composure of a man pretending he hadn't just been caught staring and also watering himself. "I was looking at the lights," I said. "Were you?" Not a question, mostly, I said, because I was apparently incapable of lying to her even in small, reasonable doses. Her smile widened. "That's a very honest correction." I looked at the tangled mess of lights. "Murphy, the extension cord, the general disaster. Do you want help?" "With the lights," she said, "or with your staring problem?" I held her gaze for a second. Then, "The other one appears chronic." She laughed, "the kind that filled the yard without asking permission." "Get over here, Calloway." I came through the side gate. Murphy greeted me like I had returned from a long and difficult journey. Full body. "Significant emotional investment. He's been waiting for you," Nora said. "He doesn't know me. He knows enough." She handed me the tangled cord. "Start with that." We worked for 20 minutes. I held the ladder while she hooked the strands along the pergola beam. I untangled the cord section by section. She narrated Murphy's failures to assist with the detached commentary of someone who had accepted the dog's limitations years ago and was now at peace. The sky went pink over the rooftops, then lavender, then that deep blue that happens right before dark. One by one the bulbs blinked on. Nora stepped back beside me and looked up. "Okay," she said. "That's better it is." She glanced over. "Thank you, sure." For a moment neither of us moved. The lights made her yard look softer than mine, less controlled. There was a half-open can of paint near the back steps, a stack of books on the patio table, a dog toy under the chair, a framed print leaning against the wall waiting to be hung. Evidence of someone building a life, not just maintaining one. I had been maintaining mine for 2 years. I hadn't noticed until right now. Nora looked at me and said, "Can I ask you something?" I almost smiled. "After the last 5 minutes, I think I should be nervous." "You probably should. Go ahead." She leaned one hip against the patio table, arms folded lightly. "Eyes on mine. You always this careful, Owen?" The question landed harder than it should have, not because it was rude, because it was accurate, the way a well-placed nail is accurate. You don't feel the first hit, you feel the second one. I looked away toward the lights. "Depends what I'm trying not to break," I said. Nora didn't answer right away. When I looked back, her expression had changed. Still curious, but softer. like the answer had opened something she hadn't expected. "Well," she said quietly. Before I could respond, "I'm not made of glass," before Murphy walked between us and knocked over an empty flower pot. Pure chaos energy, no remorse, nor a sighed. "He disagrees with the emotional atmosphere." I laughed. "An actual one. The kind that comes out before you can consider whether it's appropriate." The kind I hadn't heard for myself in a while. Nora heard it too. I could tell because she looked at me like she was filing it away for later. She offered me a beer. I should have gone home. I said yes. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in one of her metal patio chairs under the lights we had just hung. Cold beer in my hand. Murphy had arranged himself across both our feet in a way that made getting up feel like it would require a formal petition. The yard looked different at night. The green door was darker under the warm lights. A gardening guide sat on top of the book, which made me feel slightly better about my Rosemary situation. Nora came back out with her own beer and a bowl of pretzels neither of us touched much. She sat across from me first. Then Murphy rearranged himself and she shifted to the chair beside mine. Not touching. Close enough that I noticed. She looked up at the lights. "Significantly better," she said. "I try to deliver dramatic transformation. You mostly delivered zip ties and moral support. I contain multitudes." She smiled into the neck of her bottle. For a while we didn't say anything. The neighborhood settled around us. A lawnmower somewhere down the block, a kid on a bicycle, crickets starting up along the fence line. The kind of summer evening that makes people stay outside longer than they planned. Then Nora tucked one leg under herself in the chair and said, "So you always this careful, or did I just catch you on a supervised night?" I looked at her. "We're going back to that. We never left it fair." I took a sip and thought about what I actually wanted to say. The easy version was another joke, something that kept me likable and unreadable at the same time. But she had already proven she could hear the distance between funny and honest. "More careful than I used to be," I said. Her expression shifted. Not pity, something closer to recognition. "That sounds earned." It was. She nodded once. Didn't push, didn't perform understanding at me. Just left room. That made me want to fill it. "My divorce was finalized 2 years ago," I said. Nothing explosive, no incident, just a long, slow unraveling from too much silence and not enough honesty. On both sides, Nora turned her beer in her hands. "That's somehow worse than the dramatic version. It has a specific kind of efficiency." "I hate efficient heartbreak." "It doesn't ask permission," I said. "It just runs its course. And then you're standing in your own kitchen wondering when exactly you stopped being a person and became a schedule." She was quiet for a moment. "Then you have kids?" "No," she nodded. "Something careful crossed her face, you?" I asked. She shifted in her chair. "Almost married," she said. "Did all the prep work, the visits and the spreadsheets and the planning. And then one argument too many. One honest conversation too late." She paused. "I left before the wedding, which sounds dramatic, but it was really just delayed self-respect with a catering deposit attached." I laughed despite myself. She looked over and caught it. "That was a very polished line," I said. "I've had time to refine the material." There was something in her face now that hadn't been there before. Not fragility. Something more considered. A woman who had broken one version of her life on purpose and was still sorting out what to build from the pieces. I recognized something in that. "That why you moved here?" I asked. "Partly." She looked out past the fence. "My sister's nearby. I wanted a street where people still sit outside. Where someone might know your dog's name before they know yours." Mrs. Pierce across the street knew Murphy's name the second day. She also told me about her neighbor's tree root situation before I finished unloading the truck. "That tracks." Nora laughed softly. Then she looked at me and the air between us shifted. Not suddenly. Just like something that had been at a slight angle finally went level. "Can I tell you something slightly rude?" she asked. "Given how this evening has gone, I'd be disappointed if you didn't." She turned her beer in her hands. "After I left Garrett, the almost husband, after that everyone around me got very gentle. Soft voices, careful phrasing. That look people get when they're trying to figure out if a woman living alone means she's brave or she's damaged. I knew that look. I had probably worn it more than once without realizing. I hated it," she said, simply. "No anger, just fact. I hated being responded to like a headline instead of a person. Something in my chest went tight, because I understood it. And because I had been doing a version of the same thing with her. That carefulness she had named in me. It wasn't only about protecting myself. It was about seeing something I wanted and immediately making myself smaller around it so I wouldn't have to risk wanting it openly. Nora tipped her bottle toward me. That's why I said what I said. About not being made of glass, I figured. I said no. Her voice went quiet. I wasn't saying don't be kind. I was saying don't act like noticing me is something you need to apologize for. That landed somewhere specific. It named the exact thing I had been doing for 3 weeks. Watching, noticing, and then immediately converting that awareness into something polite and contained and safe. You think that's what I'm doing, I said. I think you're very aware of me, she said, meeting my eyes. And you keep trying to make that awareness look like good manners. The crickets went on. Murphy breathed slow and heavy across our feet. I let out a breath and said, You make that sound like a character flaw. I mean it as an opening. I looked away toward the lights. Then I heard myself say, The truth is, Nora, I'm not very good at wanting something halfway. She went still. Not tense, just still. The way someone gets quiet when they hear something that deserves a moment. When I looked back, her expression had changed. Not playful, not careful. Just open that, she said quietly. Sounds like the first real thing you've said to me. It might be. She took that in. Set her bottle on the table. Turned a little more toward me. Okay, she said. Okay, means I believe you. She held my gaze. It also means I'm not signing off on your early retirement from wanting things. That pulled a real laugh out of me. The second one of the night. She smiled too, and the pressure in the yard let out like a slow exhale. Murphy stood up, sneezed on my shoe, and wandered off toward the bushes with the dignity of a dog whose work here was done. Terrible timing, Nora said. He may have saved us from becoming too sincere near patio furniture. Possible. She stood and gathered the empty bottles. She was smiling in a way she wasn't trying to do anything with. For the record, she said, When you look at me from your yard, I don't mind. I forgot the beer in my hand. I noticed. I said, I know. She turned toward the back door. That's kind of the point. She said goodnight and went inside. The screen door swung shut behind her. I sat there another minute under the lights. The neighborhood was quiet. Just the crickets and a car, somewhere on the next street, and the sound of my own thinking, which had gotten considerably louder in the last hour. I walked back through the gate, stood on my own porch, looked at my front door, beige, plain, functional, the color of a man who had never once made a decision about it. I went inside, made myself a glass of water, stood at the kitchen window for a while. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because anything was wrong, because something was right. And I hadn't felt that in long enough that I'd forgotten it had a texture. I was outside the next morning at 7 with coffee, so was Nora. She was on her front steps with Murphy's leash in one hand and a cardboard box open beside her. She looked up when I came out. Morning, careful man, she said. Morning, you're up early. Murphy operates on his own schedule. I'm just the logistics. I walked to my mailbox, not because I had mail at 7 on a Saturday morning, but because I needed somewhere to be that wasn't obviously heading in her direction. That was when the silver SUV pulled up. Nora saw it the same moment I did. She went still in a way I hadn't seen from her before. Not tense exactly. Just all her warmth went somewhere else very quickly, the way a light goes out when the switch flips. A man got out, late 30s, dressed like someone who understood how Oakenthorpe communicated and made sure they communicated correctly. Dark jacket, collared shirt, shoes that had no business on a residential sidewalk at 7 in the morning. He shut the SUV door, looked at the house, then at Nora. He smiled, the kind of smile that had been practiced enough to look natural but wasn't. He said her name, except he said the wrong one, Claire. I caught the mistake. Nora caught it too. Her jaw shifted. Nora, she said. Flat. He corrected it smoothly, like he had done it before. Right, of course. He opened the back of the SUV and lifted out a taped box. I found the last of it in the storage unit. Figured you'd wanted it. You could have shipped it. I wanted to see the place. It's a house, Garrett. He looked at her in a way that meant he was deciding whether to push. Then he saw me. I was still at my mailbox, pretending to look at nothing in it, which was accurate, but which also looked approximately as casual as a person standing at attention. Garrett looked me over once, not hostile. Evaluating neighbor, he said. Owen, I said. He nodded like he was filing that away. Then he turned back to Nora. Her voice went the temperature of a window in November. Leave the box by the steps. Garrett set the box down slowly, like he was making a point with the pace of it. I wasn't trying to make anything complicated, he said. I know, Nora said. You were just passing through. Something moved in his expression. A small tightening. "You seem settled," he said. "I am." He looked at the green door, then back at her. The colors bold, the house needed a decision, her voice didn't waver. He looked at me one more time. Then he got back in the SUV and pulled away without hurry. The exit of someone who wanted the last word and had decided his absence was it. The street went quiet. I stayed at the mailbox until the car turned the corner. Then I walked toward her driveway. Nora was at the top of the porch steps, her hand on the railing, not upset, not fine either. Somewhere in the middle of that, where things process before they become speakable, Murphy had abandoned the entire situation for an azalea bush. "No loyalty in a crisis. You can stop inspecting the mailbox," Nora said. Strong architectural presence. She looked at me. "You okay?" I asked. "No. Immediate. No performance around it. But I will be." I nodded. "Do you want company or space?" She looked at me for a moment. Then she held out Murphy's leash. "Walk with me," so I did. We went 2 blocks without talking. Murphy led with military confidence. Nora kept her arms folded, eyes forward. Finally she said, "That was Garrett. The almost married one. I gathered he always shows up like that. Like the arrival itself means something." I didn't say anything, just walked. She glanced over. "You didn't step in. You didn't need me to." She looked at me a beat longer than normal. "Thank you." A sprinkler was going on someone's lawn. Murphy investigated every mailbox we passed, like each one was a different chapter of a novel he was writing. "He used to do that," Nora said. "Step in, not for me, into whatever scene was happening, so he'd be the center of it." I looked at her. She kept her eyes ahead. "He called me Claire," she said. "I noticed he's done it before. It's not an accident." She paused. "It's a reminder that he has a version of me in his head that isn't quite who I actually am, and he prefers his version." I thought about that. "The color's bold," I said, repeating what Garrett had said. The way he had said it, Nora made a small sound, not quite a laugh. "He hated the door, because it was yours." She stopped walking for a half step, just a beat, then kept going. "Yes," she said quietly, "because it was mine." At the corner, Murphy stopped to examine a fire hydrant with professional interest. Nora turned toward me. The sun had come up enough to be warm. It caught her face directly, and for once there was nothing performing in her expression. No quick line to keep the moment from being too much. "Owen," she said. "Yeah. I don't need you to rescue me from things like that, I know. But I also don't want to keep pretending." She stopped. Started again. "I don't want to keep pretending that I don't notice how it feels when you're standing beside me." The sprinkler down the block ticked in the quiet. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "I like looking at you." She held my gaze. "I like the way you make the street feel less asleep. I like that you painted your door a color that takes a position. I like that you talk back to situations instead of just enduring them." I paused. "And I like you. Not in a neighborly way, not in a "you're new and my life is quiet" way. I mean, I like the way you see things." Nora was quiet. Her expression had gone somewhere still and warm, softer than I knew how to handle. "You really don't do halfway," she said. "No." Something crossed her face, something close to relief. "Good," she said quietly. "I am so tired of halfway." That was the first moment I thought I might kiss her. Right there, morning sun, Murphy's leash loose between us. Someone's sprinkler cutting arcs across a lawn 2 houses down. Then Mrs. Pierce opened her front door across the street and called out, "Murphy looks wonderful today." Murphy barked. Mrs. Pierce waved like she hadn't just altered the structural integrity of the moment and went back inside. Nora closed her eyes. I pressed my lips together. "This neighborhood," she said, "has no concept of pacing. None whatsoever." We stood there for a second, the almost something still hanging between us, slightly rearranged but not gone. Then Murphy tried to eat a pine cone and the walk resumed. We came back to her house 20 minutes later. Garrett's box was still on the porch. Nora looked at it the way you look at something you've been politely ignoring and have now run out of reason to. "I should open it," she said. I didn't answer right away. Just looked at her. "You want me to stay?" She didn't answer immediately either, just looked at the box. Then at me. "Yeah," she said. "I do." Inside, her house still had that half-moved-in quality. Corners that were finished and corners that were still figuring themselves out. Books in stacks along the living room wall. Paint samples taped beside the kitchen doorway. The framed print leaning against a chair, still waiting to be hung. She opened the box on the kitchen floor. I stayed by the counter, close enough to be present. Not close enough to make it mine. Inside were the remnants of a future she had walked away from. A set of planning folders. A framed photo from what looked like an engagement session. A small cream-colored envelope with her name on it in careful handwriting. Nora looked at the envelope for a moment, then picked up the framed photo. Her and Garrett. Her in a cream dress, hair done, smiling beside him. Even from across the kitchen I could see the difference. Not in the photo, in her face. She looked polished, assembled. Like she had studied what happiness looked like and was performing the shape of it well enough that it photographed cleanly. She set the photo face down on the floor. I used to think leaving was the failure, she said. I waited, but staying, she stopped. Staying would have been the failure. Staying would have been choosing the version of me that was convenient for someone else. She looked at me, a direct look. The kind that's asking something without asking it out loud. I think you're right, I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she reached for the envelope, opened it, read whatever was inside. Her expression moved from something careful into something flat and exasperated. He is unbelievable, she said. What does it say? She handed it to me. I hope this new life gives you what you thought I couldn't. I looked up at her. That sentence owns a linen blazer. She laughed, so suddenly she had to cover her mouth. Loud and real and surprised. It broke something open in the kitchen. Not because the note was funny, because she was laughing at something that had once had weight over her. Because the weight had finally become absurd. She took the letter back, folded it once, dropped it in the trash. Then she looked at the photo, the folders, the whole assembled archive of a life she had chosen not to live. I don't want any of this in my house, she said. Then it doesn't stay. We carried the box to the garage. No ceremony, no speech. Just one box placed on a shelf she had already labeled in marker, donate, shred, never again. Which was, I thought, the most Nora thing I had seen yet. When we came back to the kitchen, the house felt lighter, so did she. She leaned against the counter and looked at me. Thank you. For what? For not making it bigger than it needed to be. I smiled. I'm learning your preferred calibration, good. It's specific, I've noticed. The light in the kitchen had shifted. Late morning now. Something in the air between us had settled differently since the walk, since the box, since all of it. Like the morning had done the work of several weeks. Nora looked at me. I looked at her. She said, "Oh, and yeah. I don't want to be careful right now." My pulse moved once. Hard. I stepped closer. She smiled, small, almost private. That is a very you question. I can try to make it sound cooler. No, she shook her head. I like that you asked. Then she reached out. 2 fingers. Light contact against the front of my shirt. Not grabbing, not pulling. Just there. A door held open, I'm sure, she said. So I kissed her, carefully at first. Enough to let both of us understand what was happening, before it became something we couldn't step back from. Then Nora leaned into it. And the carefulness didn't disappear. It turned into something else. Something that felt less like caution and more like certainty. When we stepped back, she was smiling. Not performing, not smug, just bright. The particular brightness of someone who has been right about something and is trying not to be too obvious about it. Well, she said. That was much better than staring. I laughed, forehead almost touching hers. Good to know, still a little careful. Working on it, Murphy barked from the back door, long and pointed. The bark of a dog who had been excluded from a significant moment and wanted that noted for the record. Nora looked over my shoulder. He's going to tell Mrs. Pierce. She already knows. 100%. We laughed. And that was the part that stayed with me most. Not just the kiss, the laughing after, the easiness of it. The way her kitchen felt like somewhere I could stand and breathe and not have to measure every word before I said it. She made coffee even though it was barely 10 in the morning. I stayed. Murphy sprawled on the floor between us like a smug and satisfied witness. And for the first time in 2 years, I was not managing my life from a careful distance. I was just in it, right there, present finally. Here is the thing about being happy, it makes you nervous. Not right away. Right away it just feels like relief. Like something you forgot existed has walked back in through the front door and taken off its coat. You think, okay, this is what this feels like. I remember now. And then about a week in, the other thing starts. The quiet watching, the internal accounting. The way your brain, which has spent 2 years becoming very skilled at protecting you from disappointment, starts running the numbers on everything good in front of you, cataloging the ways it could go wrong. Not loudly, not in words you could argue with, just a low hum underneath everything, like a smoke detector with a dying battery. Not alarming enough to act on, just present enough to remind you it's there. That was the 2 weeks after the kitchen. Nora and I didn't make any announcements. Didn't have a conversation about what anything meant, we just kept going. Coffee in the morning if we were both outside. A walk with Murphy most evenings. Her stopping by my side of the fence to look at whatever I was working on. Me finding reasons to be in my yard at times that lined up with her schedule. None of it was calculated. That was the strange part. It was just easy, and I kept waiting for the catch. Tuesday of the first week she brought over cornbread because she had made too much, which was either true or a reason. I didn't ask. I ate it and we sat on my porch and talked until the street went dark. She had strong opinions about a project she was redesigning for a client. Something about the client wanting everything centered, and Nora believing centered layouts were what happened when people were afraid to commit to a direction. I told her that sounded familiar. She threw a dish towel at me. I caught it. She looked surprised, then pleased, like she had expected me to flinch. Wednesday I helped her hang the framed print she had been leaning against the living room chair since she moved in. She stood back, tilted her head higher. She said, "I moved it higher." "No, but too high." I lowered it. "Now it looks insecure." I looked over my shoulder at her. "The print or the wall?" "Both. That feels like a lot to put on one nail." She laughed. That laugh. The one she gave when something landed exactly right. The one I had started quietly organizing my sentences around without admitting that to myself. We got the print hung. It looked right. I stayed for dinner. Thursday morning she waved from her steps. Murphy was wearing the expression of a dog who had been up since 5 and had complicated feelings about it. I waved back, went to work, drove home at 6, thinking about what she had said about commitment, about choosing a direction, about how I hadn't done that in a very long time, about how it was starting to feel possible again. Friday evening she had a work call that ran late. I was on my porch when she finally came outside with a glass of wine and the expression of someone who had spent 2 hours explaining the same thing to someone who kept nodding and not hearing it. She sat on her step. I sat on mine. Across the driveway. "Rough one," I said. "The client wants the logo to feel handcrafted and it's for a pharmaceutical company." I considered this. "Artisanal antibiotics." She put her face in her hand, but she was laughing. Saturday morning we both ended up at the same hardware store, which in retrospect was inevitable, given that we lived next door to each other and had developed a shared vocabulary around what each other's yards needed. We did not plan it. She was in the paint section when I arrived for deck screws. I found her standing in front of a wall of color samples. Holding 2 greens side by side, she looked up. "Don't say anything." I wasn't going to. "You have an opinion." "I always have an opinion." She held up both greens. "Left or right?" I looked. "Right." She looked at me, then at the sample, then back. "Why?" she said. "Left is trying to be the right green. Right just is." She stared at the samples for another moment. Then she put the left one back. She did not say I was correct, but she kept the right one, which was better, honestly. That was the shape of those first 2 weeks. Not declarations, not milestones with obvious labels. Just the steady accumulation of small true things. The cornbread, the print, the walks. The porch on Friday nights when the week had used her up and she needed to decompress somewhere that wasn't inside her own walls. I was learning her. Not learning about her. Learning her. The difference being approximately the difference between reading a map and walking the actual ground. I learned that she needed 30 minutes of quiet in the morning before she could have a real conversation. That she talked to her houseplants when she thought no one was listening, and the conversations were mildly critical. As if she were a reluctant but invested coach, that she kept a notebook by her bed and wrote in it at night, not a diary exactly, more like a running argument with herself about things that hadn't resolved yet. I learned that she cried at exactly 2 things: animals in movies who didn't make it and other people's unexpected kindness. The first one she was embarrassed by. The second one she wasn't. I learned that she was funnier than she let most people see. The sharp, quick wit was real, but there was a warmer layer underneath it, slower and more generous, that came out when she trusted the room. She was learning me too. I could feel it. The way she handed me a coffee already made the way I made it without asking. The way she had stopped explaining jokes the second time. The way she had started saying what she actually meant without wrapping it in 2 layers of deniability first. We were building something, not loudly, not with announcements, just brick by brick, in the ordinary hours. And then, 2 weeks after the kitchen, Garrett Finch came back. I was pulling into my driveway when I saw his silver SUV parked in front of her house, not in front of the door this time. He was standing at the edge of her driveway, beside his car, and Nora was on the porch steps. Same posture as before, contained, arms loose, but not relaxed. Murphy was inside. I could hear him at the front window. I parked, sat in my truck for a moment. Part of me wanted to get out immediately and be visible. Part of me understood that wasn't the move. Nora didn't need a prop. She needed to handle her own ground on her own terms. So I sat. I watched without appearing to watch, which I was apparently developing as a core skill. Garrett had a folder in his hand, something legal looking. He was talking. Nora was listening, not nodding, just listening in that way she had of giving nothing back until she decided to. Then she said something short. 1 sentence, maybe 2, Garrett responded. Longer than her. He gestured with the folder. Stepped slightly closer. Nora didn't step back. But she didn't step forward either. Then she said something else. And whatever it was landed differently, because Garrett's posture changed, just slightly. The practiced ease in his shoulders shifted. He said something quietly. She shook her head. He held out the folder. She looked at it for a moment. Then she took it, and she turned and walked back into the house without another word. Garrett stood at the edge of the driveway for a moment. Then he turned, and he saw me. I had not moved, still sitting in my truck, window down, engine off. He looked at me the way men look at each other when both of them know exactly what conversation is actually happening. I didn't look away. He didn't look away either. Then he walked over, not aggressive, measured. The walk of someone who had been in enough rooms to know how to make an approach look casual when it isn't. He stopped at the end of my driveway. Owen, he said. Garrett. He looked at Nora's house. The green door. The lights on the pergola just visible from where we stood. She seems good, he said. I didn't answer, I just meant. He stopped, adjusted. She seems settled, she is, he nodded. Turned the folder in his hands once. She settles in fast, doesn't she? Still not a question. Something with a sharper edge than the words themselves. I wouldn't know, I said. I just met her, which wasn't a lie, wasn't the whole truth either. Garrett looked at me, and then he said it, quietly, no heat. Just the way you say something you have said before, to different people in different contexts, and you know exactly what it does. Nora starts things well, he said. She's good at beginnings. I looked at him. I'm just saying, you seem like a decent guy. I'd want someone to give me the same context. He held my gaze for another second. She leaves, Owen. It's what she does. When things ask more of her than the beginning asked, then he got in his SUV, drove away. Same unhurried exit. Same calculation in the pace of it. I sat in my truck for a long time after that. I did not go knock on Nora's door that evening. I told myself she needed space after dealing with him. I told myself it wasn't the right time. Both of those things might have been true. Neither of them was the whole reason. The whole reason was that sentence was sitting in my chest like a splinter I couldn't locate. Not bleeding, not exactly painful, just present. Every time I moved a certain way I could feel it. She leaves. It's what she does. I knew better than to take that at face value. I knew exactly what Garrett was. I had been watching people manage situations for 12 years in construction. I understood the difference between a person sharing information and a person protecting a position. Garrett Finch was protecting a position. I knew that. And it still worked. Because here is the thing about a doubt planted by someone who knew a person before you did. It doesn't need to be true to do damage. It just needs to land in a place where some part of you was already afraid, and some part of me was already afraid. I just hadn't been looking at it directly. I looked at it that night, lay in my bed and looked at the ceiling and did the thing I had been avoiding. The actual accounting. The version where I was honest about the things I never said out loud. My marriage had not ended because my ex-wife was a bad person. It had ended because I was not fully there for the last 2 years of it. Not cruel. Not absent in any way that showed up obviously, just somewhere slightly behind a pane of glass. Present enough to pass inspection, not present enough to matter. I had watched my own life from a careful distance and called it being responsible, called it being steady, called it keeping things from breaking. What I had actually been doing was making sure nothing got close enough to cost me anything. And now here I was, 2 weeks into something that felt real. Something I had not manufactured or managed or kept at arm's length. And the first thing that happened was I sat in my truck listening to a man I had spoken to for 3 minutes, and I let him write doubt into a story I was supposed to be living. That was the night I started to pull back. Not because I decided to. Not consciously. But the next morning I saw Nora on her steps with Murphy and I waved. She smiled and waved back. Normal, easy. I went to work, I came home, checked the mail. Went inside. I did not go to the fence. She texted that evening. A photo of Murphy sitting in front of the fridge with the expression of a dog filing a formal grievance. The caption said, "He's staging a protest over the kibble situation." I wrote back, "Is he unionizing?" She sent back a laughing emoji and then, "Dinner Thursday," I said. "Yeah, let me know the time." I set the phone down, and I sat in my kitchen and did something I am not proud of. I let the days pass, conversation by conversation, text by text, present enough not to be obviously gone, distant enough that the warmth had started to quietly adjust itself downward. I hated it while I was doing it. I kept doing it. Dinner on Thursday was the first time she named it. We went to a small Italian place on the edge of Dilworth. Corner table, good bread. The kind of restaurant that doesn't hurry you. She wore a dark blue dress, and for a second when she opened the door of her house, I forgot what I was trying to manage, and just looked at her. She noticed. Of course she noticed. "If you want to look," she said. "Still working on asking," I said. She smiled. But it was a degree cooler than before, not cold. Just noticing. We had a good dinner. The conversation was good. We were good at conversation, Nora and I. We had been from the start. But underneath it, the thing I had been doing all week was sitting at the table with us. Quiet, obvious, taking up exactly as much room as something that isn't being talked about always takes up. After the bread and before the main course, Nora set her fork down. She looked at me. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" Something changed. I didn't say anything. "Last week you stayed for dinner without being asked," she said. "This week you have been." She paused. Chose the word carefully. "Available, I've been around. You've been polite." She said the word the way it deserved. Like a verdict. There's a difference. I looked at my water glass. "Garrett came back," she said. "Not a question." I looked up, I saw his car, she said simply. "I didn't know if he spoke to you. Now I think he did." I let out a slow breath. He said something. What did he say? I told her. Not performing it, just the sentence. The delivery. The context. Nora listened. Her face was careful and still. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And you believed him?" I didn't, Owen. Her voice was even. Not angry, which was somehow worse. "You believed him enough to spend a week quietly building distance while being too decent to say why." I didn't argue with that. Because it was accurate. "I left him," she said. "I didn't leave because I'm someone who leaves. I left because I spent 3 years making myself smaller so he could stay comfortable. I left because I finally understood that staying would have meant agreeing to disappear." She held my gaze. "That's not the same thing as what he told you." "I know," I said. "Do you?" The question sat between us. "I know it now," I said. "Sitting across from you, yes." In my kitchen at 11 at night with nothing but his voice in my head. I wasn't as sure. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm not going to convince you not to be afraid, Owen. That's not something I can do for you." She paused. "But I need you to know the difference between being careful and letting someone else's version of me replace what you actually know." I heard that. "The way you hear something that is going to stay with you." "I'm sorry," I said. She nodded. "Once. I'm not asking for perfect," she said. "But I need honest. Even when it looks bad, we finish dinner. Quieter than before. Not bad quiet, not comfortable quiet either. The kind of quiet that means something has been moved and will take time to settle back into position." I walked her to her door. We stood on the porch for a moment. Murphy was visible through the front window. He pressed his nose to the glass and left a print. She looked at me for a moment longer than the goodbye required. "Good night, Owen," she said. Then she went inside. I stood on her porch for a second after the door closed, looked at the green paint in the porch light. Then I went home, and I sat in my kitchen and felt the full weight of what I had almost done. Not the leaving I hadn't left, but the retreat. The slow, polite pullback that looked like distance, but was really just fear wearing a reasonable face. Fear that she would leave. Fear that I wasn't worth staying for. Fear dressed up as caution so I didn't have to examine it directly. Garrett hadn't put that fear there. He had just found it, and I had let him. I called Diane the next morning. My sister, who is 4 years younger than me and approximately 400 years wiser about most things, answered on the second ring with the tone of someone who had been expecting this call for a while. "Hey," I said. "Hey yourself." A pause. "What's happening? I need to talk through something." Okay, I told her all of it. Nora, the box, kitchen, the 2 weeks, Garrett, the week I had spent being carefully useless, dinner, the conversation. The way I had let one sentence from a man I had spoken to for 3 minutes overwrite everything I had observed with my own eyes over a month. Deanne listened. She was good at listening. She had been listening to me make the same mistake in different clothes for most of our adult lives, and she had never once stopped picking up the phone. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Owen? Yeah, you know Garrett's wrong." "Yes, then that's not what this is about." I didn't answer. "You're not scared she'll leave," Diane said. Not a question, a correction, the kind she gave when she had been waiting for me to get there on my own and had run out of patience. "You're scared you don't deserve someone who stays." The kitchen went quiet. "That's different," she said. "That's yours. It was there before Nora, before Garrett. It was probably there before the divorce, if we're being honest." She paused. "And it's the thing that's going to cost you something real if you don't look at it directly." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up, because she was right. Not in the way that hurts when someone is right about something you didn't know. In the way that hurts when someone names something you have been carrying so long you forgot it had a name. I didn't deserve someone who stays. That was the story underneath all the carefulness, all the distance, all the managed space I kept between myself and anything good enough to matter. Not that Nora would leave, that I wouldn't be worth it if she didn't. I drove past Mrs. Pierce's house on my way back from a job site that afternoon. She was on her porch, watering her window box in the way she had of always being visible, at moments that seemed less than coincidental. I pulled over. She looked at me over her reading glasses with the expression of someone who had been waiting. "Owen Calloway," she said. "You look terrible." "Thanks, Mrs. Pierce. Sit down then." I sat on her porch steps. She came out with 2 glasses of iced tea and settled into her rocker. "That man came back," she said. "Not a question. How do you know about that?" She gave me a look that could only be described as professionally offended. "I have been on this street for 27 years. I know everything that happens before it happens." "What did you see?" "The silver car." Both times, she took a sip of her tea. "I also know enough about Nora Ashby to know what that man was doing at her driveway." "He said she doesn't finish things," I said. Mrs. Pierce made a sound. Short. The sound of someone filing an opinion without requiring the full sentence. "She left him," she said. 3 years she was in that. And she walked away when walking away was the right thing. She rocked forward once. That's not someone who doesn't finish things. That's someone who knows the difference between finishing and staying past finished. I looked out at the street. "He needed her smaller," Mrs. Pierce said. Plainly, she wouldn't do it. "So now he has a story where that's her flaw." She set her glass down and looked at me. "You like that green door?" "Yeah." "Then stop letting that man have any more room in your head than he's earned." She picked up her watering can. "And fix whatever you broke this week before it sets." I drove home, sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time. I looked at her house. The green door. The patio lights just visible around the side. The window box she had planted that had started to look intentional. I thought about Garrett saying she starts things well. I thought about her throwing out the box without ceremony. Labeling the shelf. Moving forward without pompousness. I thought about 3 weeks of watching before I came through that gate, and how nothing in that time had looked like someone who didn't finish things. And I thought about what I was actually afraid of. I sat with it, really sat with it, not arguing with it, not explaining it away, just looking at it directly. The fear wasn't about Nora, it was about me. About the version of me that had gone quiet inside a marriage for so long that by the time it ended, I couldn't remember when I had stopped being fully present in it. About the version of me that had spent 2 years building a structure and calling it a life, and never once asking if the structure was built around anything real. About whether I was capable of being worth something to someone now. Not in general, not abstractly, to her. I sat with all of that for a long time, then I went inside, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window, and I made a decision, not a speech, not a plan, not a thing I was going to say to Nora tonight or even this week necessarily. Just a decision. That I was not going to let fear win this one by default, not by absence, not by slow-managed retreat into a life that was safe because nothing in it mattered enough to hurt. I had done that once already. I knew what it cost. It cost everything quiet and clean and nothing. It cost everything. The following morning I woke up at 5:30, not by alarm. just awake. The way you are when something in you has shifted and your body hasn't caught up yet. I made coffee, looked at the yard in the early grey light. The gate between our properties was low. We both knew it. Murphy used it as a philosophical suggestion rather than an actual boundary, which meant it got pushed open regularly and had started to sit at a slight angle. Not broken, just tired of pretending to be a barrier it wasn't. Nora had mentioned it 2 weeks back, offhand, not a request exactly. Just, Murphy's going to eventually just take that whole gate down with enthusiasm. I had meant to fix it. I had let a week of managed distance make me forget. I looked at the gate for a long moment, then I went to the garage, got my tools, came out into the grey morning before the street was fully awake, before Nora was up, before anyone could see me do it and attach any meaning to it that I hadn't figured out for myself yet. I fixed the gate, new hardware, realigned the post. The latch set clean and solid when I tested it. Took about 40 minutes. I gathered my tools, went back inside, made a second cup of coffee, sat in my kitchen, not waiting for anything specific, not rehearsing anything. Just there, in my own house, in my own morning, without the careful distance, without the management, just present. Around 7:15 I heard her back door. Murphy first, the sound of him hitting the deck like he was making an announcement. Then her footsteps. Then the quiet that meant she was standing there with her coffee, looking at the yard the way she did every morning. The pause was longer than normal. I knew the moment she saw it, not because I could see her, because the pause kept going. I stayed where I was. Then I heard the side gate open. Not Murphy's push, her hand. Footsteps across the grass, still sitting at my kitchen table when the knock came at the back door. 3 times, unhurried. I got up, walked to the door, opened it. Nora was standing on my back step, coffee in one hand. Murphy sitting behind her like a witness at a proceeding. She looked at me. "The gate looks good," she said. "Had the hardware for it." "Since when?" "Couple weeks." She held my gaze for a moment. Something moved in her expression. Not quite a smile yet. Something before a smile. "Something deciding you couldn't have texted me?" "I could have, but you didn't." "No." She looked at me a moment longer. Then the smile came. Quiet, real. She stepped inside. Murphy followed because Murphy recognized no boundaries, spiritual or architectural. She sat down at my kitchen table, set her coffee next to mine. I sat across from her. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then I said, "I need to tell you something." "Okay." I let him get in my head. "I know. That's not about you. It was already there before he showed up. I found it." Nora looked at her coffee cup. Then at me. "What was there?" she said. Not a question. An opening, so I told her. Not the polished version. Not the version where I sounded self-aware and recovered. The real one. The part about the marriage, about the silence. About 2 years of rebuilding a structure that looked like a life from the outside and had nothing inside it that surprised me anymore. About the fear that I wasn't worth staying for. About how Garrett's sentence had found exactly that place and sat down in it. She listened, all of it, without filling the silences, without trying to fix the parts that didn't need fixing. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Owen, yeah, I'm not asking you to be sure of everything. I'm not asking you to have none of that fear." She met my eyes. "I'm asking you to be honest about it. With me. Not managed. Honest. Even when it's ugly." I nodded. "That's all," I said. "That and the gate." She lifted her coffee, which needed fixing 2 weeks ago. I looked at her. She looked back. "I know," I said. "Good." She set her cup down. "Then we're clear?" Murphy put his head on the table between us. We both looked at him. "He thinks this was his idea," Nora said. "He's not entirely wrong that it needed to happen." She laughed, and the kitchen opened back up. The thing that had been pressed tight and careful for a week let go. Not all at once, but enough that when she reached across the table and set her hand over mine, I didn't move away from it, didn't measure it, didn't convert it into something safer. Just held it. Her hand in mine at a kitchen table in the morning, coffee going cold, dog between us uninvited, sunlight coming through the back window the way it did in the early part of the day when everything still felt like it had a chance. Small things. Real things, the kind of things worth not running from. I had spent 2 years being careful with my own life, treating it like something that could break if I held it wrong, and what I had actually managed to do was keep it from feeling like mine. Nora's hand on the table, Murphy's chin on the wood between us, coffee getting cold in a kitchen that had started to feel like somewhere worth being. This was the thing I had been protecting myself from. and it turned out the only dangerous thing about it was how much I had almost missed it. Here is what nobody tells you about choosing to stop running. It's not dramatic. There's no moment where everything snaps into place. No speech that fixes it. No gesture large enough to cover the ground you lost. There's just the next morning. And the one after that. And the slow, unglamorous work of being present in your own life without flinching every time something good gets close enough to matter. That was what came after the kitchen table, after she set her hand over mine, after Murphy put his chin between us like a senior official present for the proceedings, after the coffee went cold and the morning moved forward and we sat there long enough that the light through the back window changed angle and neither of us felt the need to fill every second with something. That morning mattered, not because anything was resolved with a bow on it, because something had been named, set on the table between us, like an object we had both agreed to stop pretending wasn't there. I was afraid of not being worth staying for. She knew it now, and she had stayed at my kitchen table anyway, finished her coffee, let Murphy steal a corner of her chair, looked at me across the table like I was a person worth looking at. That was the morning, then came the weeks, real ones. The kind that don't announce themselves as significant while they're happening. The kind you only understand later, when you look back and realize the foundation was being poured the whole time you thought you were just eating dinner. The summer passed the way good summers do, without you noticing how much of it you've used up until the air turns. June went fast, July went faster. August slowed down the way August does, heavy and warm and unhurried, the kind of month that makes a person sit on a porch at 9 in the evening and not feel any urgency about going inside. We were good at that. The porch, the evenings, the slow accumulation of hours that didn't need to be anything more than what they were. She finished a big project in early July, came home to her house still. Though the line between our 2 yards had been a formality for a while by then, with the specific exhaustion of someone who had been running at full capacity for 3 months and had just been allowed to stop. I made dinner. She sat on the kitchen floor with Murphy because the floor was cooler than anywhere else in the house, and Murphy had already figured that out and claimed the best spot. I brought her a plate on the floor. She looked up at me. You didn't have to. You looked like someone who needed to eat without having to decide anything. She held the plate for a moment. Then, that is an unreasonably accurate red. Murphy pressed his shoulder against hers. Solidarity. That was July. August was slower and easier. We found a farmer's market 3 blocks over that neither of us had known existed, despite having lived within walking distance of it for different lengths of time. We went on Saturday mornings. She bought things she had no clear plan for and made them into something anyway. I carried the bag and did not complain, which she noted once with a look that meant she had noticed from the beginning Murphy was not allowed at the farmer's market. He sat in the kitchen window and watched us leave with the expression of a dog filing a formal grievance with a regulatory body he believed in, but could not directly contact. We always brought him something. He accepted these offerings without gratitude, which seemed consistent with his broader philosophy. There was a Saturday in late August when we came back from the market and sat on her porch steps and ate the bread we had bought while it was still warm and the street was quiet and the oak trees were still fully green overhead, and neither of us said anything for a while. Just sat there in the warm morning, Murphy between us, bread in our hands. I looked at her sideways. She was looking at the street, at nothing in particular, her hair down, which she didn't do often. A streak of something from the farmer's market on her wrist, preserves probably, from the jar she had insisted on buying and immediately opened on the walk home. She wasn't performing anything, wasn't managing anything. Just there, I thought about what she had said that first night under the lights, about being responded to like a headline instead of a person, about hating the gentleness that was really just other people's discomfort wearing a kind face. I thought about how she was nothing like a headline. She was a woman who bought preserves and opened them before she got home, who talked to houseplants with the tone of a disappointed but invested supervisor, who picked the right green because it just was, without needing to explain it, who had looked over a fence on a Friday evening in May and said exactly the right words to a man who had forgotten he was worth saying them to. I looked at my bread, then I said, "I'm glad you moved in next door," not a speech, not a lead-in to something larger. Just the thing that was true. Nora looked over at me. "That's it?" she said. "That's it." She looked back at the street, took a bite of bread. "Good," she said quietly. "Me too," Murphy sneezed. We stayed on the steps until the bread was gone and the morning had moved into actual heat. Then we went inside and she made coffee and I fixed the screen on her back door, which had been coming loose at the bottom corner for 2 weeks, and neither of those things were romantic or significant, but they were ours. And by then I understood that ours was the point. September settled over the street with a shift in the air rather than a single announcement. The mornings went cooler, the oaks started turning at the edges, the neighborhood moved into the quieter rhythm of early fall. Fewer people on the porches, more lights coming on earlier, the smell of something burning 2 blocks over on a Saturday afternoon. We fell into it without deciding to. She had a deadline in September that kept her at her desk until late most evenings. I'd finish a job, come home, and see her light on across the yard. Sometimes I'd knock on the gate with the back of my hand, our signal by then, though neither of us had formally established it as a signal, and she'd come to the back door with the look of someone who had been staring at a screen for 4 hours and needed 5 minutes of something that wasn't work. We'd sit on the back steps. Not long, 15 minutes sometimes. Just enough Murphy would arrange himself across both our feet, which was his primary contribution to emotional support and one he took seriously. Then she'd go back inside. I'd go home. That was enough. That was, in fact, exactly the right amount. One evening in mid-September, she came through the gate with a problem she had been turning over for 3 days. A client who wanted something that contradicted itself on a fundamental visual level, and every solution she came up with either solved one half or made the other half worse. She sat on my porch step and laid out the whole thing without asking for an answer, just needing to say it out loud to someone who would listen without pretending to understand design theory. I listened. I did not pretend to understand design theory. When she finished, she looked at me. "You have nothing," she said. "I have nothing useful. Say it anyway." I thought about it. The client doesn't know what they want. They know what they're afraid of. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at the yard. Then she picked up her coffee and went back inside without another word. The next morning she sent me a photo of the finished design. It looked exactly right. I didn't know enough to say why I sent back. "I had nothing to do with that," she sent back. "You had something to do with it." I kept that, didn't say so, just kept it. October came in with color, the oaks going fully gold, the light going that horizontal amber that only happens in fall afternoons, the street looking like something from a photograph of itself. Murphy developed a new obsession with a specific leaf pile at the base of the oak in Nora's yard and spent 20 minutes each morning rearranging it to meet specifications only he understood. We did not interfere with his process. It was in late October that she told me Garrett had called. We were walking Murphy on the long route. Same geese. Murphy had apparently entered a new phase of believing he might catch one this time. He had not updated his strategy from the previous 40 attempts. I respected the commitment if not the analysis. She said Garrett called. I looked at her when, few days ago, she kept her eyes forward. I needed to sit with it before I said anything. I waited. He said he wanted to apologize. She was quiet for a moment, choosing words the way she did when something mattered. He told me what he said to you, that I leave, that I don't finish things. She paused. He said he knew it wasn't true when he said it. He used the words protecting territory. The park went on around us. Kids on the swings. A man throwing a ball for his dog, a dog that actually retrieved it, which Murphy observed with the polite incomprehension of someone watching a sport they had been told existed, but had never seen played. "Do you believe him?" I asked. "I believe that he believes it now," she said carefully. "Whether he believed it then?" She shook her head slightly. "It doesn't really matter. What matters is what he chose to do with it." I nodded. She said he was sorry he talked to you. "Are you glad he called?" She thought about it honestly. Not a polite pause. Real consideration. "It closed something," she said finally. "I didn't need it to." "But it did." She glanced at me sideways. "He's not a villain, Owen. He's just a man who needed to be the most important thing in every room he walked into. And when I stopped letting him be," she looked forward again, "he didn't know what to do with himself. So he made it a story where the problem was mine. We passed a bench where an older couple sat sharing something from a paper bag. They weren't talking, just sitting in the easy way of people who had been doing it long enough that silence was its own kind of conversation. I watched them for a moment as we passed. I know men like that, I said. Most people do, Nora said. The thing is, they don't always know they're doing it. That's what makes it so hard to name while you're inside it. Murphy gave up on the geese with a dignity that suggested he had never really been trying. We finished the walk mostly quiet, the good kind. The kind that meant we didn't need to fill the space. Does it help? I asked. Him calling, she considered. It meant I could stop waiting for him to become a problem again, she said. That's something, she looked at me. And it meant I could tell you, which I wanted to do, that mattered. Not the call, the fact that she wanted me to know. I didn't say that out loud. But I think she understood it from the way I nodded. Some things between us had stopped requiring words. November came cold and fast. She started leaving a mug at my house, not officially. It appeared on my cabinet shelf one morning and stayed. No conversation about it, no ceremony. Just there between my two mugs, like it had always been part of the arrangement. Her second coffee of the day was made at my counter more often than not. She had strong scoffed opinions about my coffee maker, its temperature settings, its age, its philosophical shortcomings, which she shared without being asked, and which I was not going to admit were entirely correct. Murphy began treating the gate between our yards as a personal commuting route, passing back and forth throughout the day with the air of a professional who maintained two offices and had strong views about which one had the better light at any given hour. Mrs. Pierce began waving at both of us simultaneously. On this street, that was the closest thing to a formal announcement. Diane drove down on a Saturday in mid-November. She sat on my porch with iced tea. She always wanted iced tea regardless of season, which was a thing about her I had stopped questioning years ago, and watched Nora across the yard deadheading her window box plants with the focused energy of someone engaged in a minor but personal conflict. Then Diane looked at me, said nothing, just looked at me with the expression of a younger sister who has been right about something for a long time and is making the deliberate choice not to say so. Okay, I said. I didn't say anything. You're saying it very loudly. She sipped her tea. She's good for you, I know. Does she know that you know that? I looked across the yard. Nora had stopped deadheading. She was now talking to the plants, quietly, with what appeared from where I sat to be a direct but not unkind assessment of their recent performance and what she expected going forward. I think she's starting to, I said. Diane patted my knee once. Good, she set down her glass. Now fix the loose board on your porch step before someone breaks an ankle. I almost went down when I got here. That was Diane. I fixed the board. December came and the neighborhood put up lights. Mrs. Pierce outdid herself on the porch display, which she had done every year for 27 years, according to the running record she maintained through unsolicited updates to all households within a 2-block radius. Nora bought a wreath for the green door, pine branches and a red ribbon. Nothing expensive. It looked exactly right, not like decoration but like completion, the way the door had been waiting for something to finish the thought it had started in that first week of May. I watched her hang it from my driveway. She looked over. If you want to help, I was helping from here. You were watching, also helping. She held out the wreath. I crossed the yard, hung it. We both stepped back. Good, she said. It is. She looked at me sideways. You're getting less careful. Working on it, I've noticed. I had been noticing too, not as a project, not as something I was monitoring, just as a thing that was quietly unremarkably true. The space between wanting something and reaching for it had gotten smaller. Not gone. I didn't think it ever went entirely. But smaller, manageable, the kind of distance you cross without making a ceremony of it. That was December. January was the month I started thinking about the thing I hadn't said yet. Not yet. I knew it wasn't yet, but it was there, sitting in the back of my chest in the way of something that has found its place and is simply waiting for the right moment without making a fuss about it. The street was quiet in January. The cold kept people inside. Murphy wore a jacket that Nora had bought and that he accepted with the resignation of an animal who had learned that some indignities were non-negotiable. Mrs. Pierce still appeared on her porch for brief morning windows, checking on the neighborhood the way a ship's captain checks the weather, efficiently, without drama, with complete confidence in her own assessment of conditions. Nora and I fell into the rhythms that winter makes natural. Dinners that went long. Evenings on the couch with books that sometimes got read and sometimes didn't. Mornings when the cold outside made inside feel like a deliberate choice rather than a default. I looked at her across rooms a lot in January. Not the way I had looked at her from across the yard that first summer, calculating the appropriate distance. Just looked. The way you look at something that belongs in the place it's occupying. The way a room looks right when the furniture is finally where it should be, and you stop noticing the furniture and just notice the room. She caught me once, in the kitchen, when she came in from her office and I was at the counter and she looked up and I hadn't looked away in time. "If you want to look," she said. "Asking," I said. She smiled and went to the coffee maker and didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. February came cold but clear. One Friday evening in late February, I was fixing a loose hinge on my back door when Nora came through the gate with Murphy, which was so routine by then that I didn't look up, just reached behind me and got the second beer off the step and held it out without turning around. She took it. Sat on the step beside me, Murphy went to investigate the leaf pile, which he had reorganized 3 times this week alone and which apparently still did not meet his standards. We sat there, cold air, bare trees. The particular quiet of a February evening when the world hasn't yet decided to start up again. Then Nora said, "Owen, yeah, this house." I set down the screwdriver, looked at her. "What about it?" She looked at the yard, at the gate between our properties, at the lights on her pergola, still strung, still lit most evenings, because neither of us had found a reason to take them down through fall or winter, and at some point they had stopped being seasonal and become just ours. "I'm here more than I'm there," she said. "I know. The gate makes more sense as a path than a boundary at this point." "It does." She looked at her house. The green door visible past the fence, dark in the February evening, the wreath still on it, dry now, pine needles sparse but still there. "I'm not suggesting anything," she said. "I'm just noticing, yes." I looked at the gate for a moment. Then I looked at her. "Move in," I said, just like that. No rehearsal, no build-up. Just the thing that had been true for 2 months said out loud in the cold February air, with a beer in my hand and a screwdriver on the step beside me. Nora looked at me. "That's not a question," she said. "It's not? You're not asking, I'm asking. It's just not a question because I already know what I want the answer to be." She was quiet for a moment. Murphy came back from the leaf pile and sat between us with the settled authority of an official present for the conclusion of a negotiation he had been facilitating all along. "Only if we keep the green door," she said. I looked at her. "Your green door?" "Our green door," that word ours. I held it for a second. "Let it mean what it meant, deal," I said. She looked at the door, then at me, then at the beer in her hand. "You could have built to that more," she said. "I could have. More setup. A little arc. I'm saving it for something bigger." She looked at me then. Something moved in her face, quick and warm, and then settled into that smile. The real one. The one she gave when she stopped trying to do anything with it and just let it be there. "Okay," she said. And that was that. She moved things over the way she had been arriving all along, in small true steps without ceremony. A box of books. Her design set up in the second bedroom, which became less a guest room and more just her room within a week. Murphy's bed in the corner of mine, which Murphy accepted as his rightful territory, within approximately 4 minutes of it touching the floor, and which he never once acknowledged had previously been elsewhere. The mug already on my shelf got a second one next to it. Her notebooks took the corner of the kitchen counter permanently. The framed print that had traveled from her living room wall to mine, the one we had hung together in week 2 and rehung when she moved in. She looked at it for a long moment when we were deciding where it went and said, "Same spot." I put it in the same spot. It looked exactly as right as it had the first time. The olive oil moved from second shelf to first. These were not dramatic things. That was the point. The undramatic rightness of them was the whole thing. The green door stayed on the house next door while we found renters. We put up the listing in late February and showed the house onto Saturday in early March to a young couple, mid-20s, nervous in the specific way of people making a decision they are hoping is the right one and are not entirely sure yet. They walked through the rooms with the careful attention of people trying to imagine their own life inside someone else's. I showed them the fuse box, told them about the thunderstorm situation with the appliances. Nora gave them the recycling schedule. Actual Tuesday, she said, not neighborhood Tuesday, which is a distinction worth making, and told them about Mrs. Pierce, who would tell them everything they needed to know about the street, and several things they didn't before she told them her first name, and that this was simply how the block worked. and should not be taken personally. The young couple looked at each other when Nora said that. A quick look. The look of two people who have just heard something that confirms a feeling they already had. I recognized that look. They took the house. Mrs. Pierce brought them a casserole their first week without being asked. Some things on this block were simply structural. The night we handed over the keys was a Wednesday in mid-March. We came home, to our house, which had been our house officially for 3 weeks, and unofficially for considerably longer, and Nora made tea and we sat on the back porch under the lights, Murphy between us, the yard going dark at the edges, the lights warm overhead against the cold March sky. "You okay?" I asked. She thought about it the way she thought about real questions, actually not as a reflex. "Yeah," she said. "Actually, yeah, no ceremony needed." I said goodbye to the door this morning. She looked at me sideways, quietly. "Don't make it a thing. Did the door say anything back?" "It's a door, Owen. That door has opinions," she smiled. It wished us well. It said it thought we'd earned it. I looked at the lights. Then at her. "I think we're going to be fine," I said. She looked at me steadily. "We're already fine." She was right. We were. Spring came in fast that year. The oaks went green quickly, like they had been waiting. The yard filled out. Nora planted things along the back fence in April. She did it on a Saturday morning while I was working on a bid at the kitchen table. And when I came out to get a second coffee, she had already turned half the fence line into something intentional. I looked at it and didn't ask what anything was. I just trusted it. She had earned that trust on the green door alone, and many things since. Murphy discovered that a groundhog had established residence under the shed. He made it his personal mission to open diplomatic channels, which consisted primarily of barking into the entrance hole and waiting for a response that never came. The groundhog, for its part, showed no signs of acknowledging that the talks were ongoing. Mrs. Pierce started a conversation with Nora on the front path most mornings that occasionally ran 40 minutes. I had been told this happened to everyone on the block eventually and was considered a rite of passage rather than an imposition. Nora seemed to have accepted it in that spirit and occasionally came back inside with genuinely useful information about neighborhood logistics, so the arrangement appeared to be working. I finished a large commercial job at the end of March that had been running since January. Came home on a Friday evening with the specific hollowed-out feeling of someone who has been operating at full capacity for too long and has just been allowed to stop. Nora was at the kitchen table with her notebook, working on something. She looked up when I came in, took one look at my face. 10 minutes, she said. I changed my clothes, stood at the back window for a while looking at the yard, the groundhog hole under the shed, the new plants along the fence starting to show their first green. Murphy asleep in the square of late afternoon sun on the porch. She didn't say anything, didn't check on me, just let the 10 minutes be 10 minutes. Then I sat down at the table. She put a plate in front of me. We ate, we talked. The evening passed, small, real, mine, all of it. I looked at her across the table that night, her with her tea, working on something in her notebook while I read. The kitchen quiet except for Murphy's occasional sleep sounds and the particular settling of a house in the evening. And I understood something I had been approaching for a while without finding the exact words for it. The life I had built after my divorce. The clean house, the steady schedule, the careful maintenance of a structure that had no surprises in it. I had thought that was what recovery looked like. Controlled, safe. Nothing that could go wrong because nothing was risked. What it had actually been was a life on hold. Not recovering, waiting. Without knowing it was waiting, the January I had stopped sleeping well. The Saturday mornings with nowhere specific to be, the beige walls. All of it had been the texture of a life that was protecting itself from the possibility of something better by convincing itself that better wasn't available. Then Nora had come through a gate on a Friday evening in May with a dog who recognized no concept of personal property, and she had looked over a fence and said exactly the right words to a man who had spent 2 years forgetting he was worth saying them to. I thought about that for a while. Then I got up and washed the dishes, and she kept writing in her notebook. And Murphy came in from the porch and settled himself between us with the settled certainty of an animal who understood exactly where he was supposed to be. It was a Saturday in late April when I knew it was time. Not because something happened. Not because of any event or milestone or external signal. Just because the thing I had been carrying in my chest for months had stopped feeling like something I was waiting to be ready for. I just was. The evening was warm, genuinely warm for the first time that year, the first evening of spring that felt like a gift rather than a negotiation with the temperature. The lights were on over the patio. The yard smelled like the new things Nora had planted along the fence, something green and alive and deliberately chosen. She was on the patio with a glass of wine and a book she wasn't reading because Murphy had put his head in her lap 20 minutes ago, and she had clearly made her decision about the book. I came outside. She looked up. Hey. I sat down across from her. Then I didn't. I moved to the chair beside her. Close enough, she looked at me sideways. You have a face. I always have a face. A different one. I looked at the lights. The same strand we had hung on, a Friday evening nearly a year ago when I was still pretending I wasn't paying attention. They had been through a summer and a fall and a winter and come back and kept burning. We had never once taken them down. At some point they had stopped being decoration and become just part of what this yard was. I reached into my jacket pocket. Nora saw. She went still, not tense. Still in the way she got quiet when something deserved a moment, eyes clear, breath steady. Present, Murphy lifted his head from her lap and sat up. He had impeccable instincts for occasion when he chose to use them. I held the ring box for a moment, not performing it, just being in it, not managing from a distance, not measuring the space between wanting this and reaching for it, just there. I'm not good at halfway, I said. Nora's breath moved. I know, she said quietly. I spent 2 years before you building a life that had no surprises in it. I told myself that was what recovery looked like. I looked at her. It wasn't. It was just a more organized version of hiding. She said, nothing, eyes on mine, and then you came through that gate, I said, and caught me watering my own foot, and called me out in the first week, and talked to your houseplants like they had underperformed on a deliverable, and painted your door a color that made a decision. I stopped for a second, and I didn't know what to do with any of it. I know, she said. Softer now, I figured it out. I opened the box, simple ring, white gold, clean, the way I wanted everything between us to be, not for show, just real. I figured out that the thing I was afraid of not deserving, the staying, the hand over mine at the kitchen table, the Tuesday dinners and the morning coffee and the 10 minutes when I need them, it was already here. Had been here. I looked at the lights, then back at her. Had been here since the night we hung these. Nora's eyes had filled. She wasn't letting them go yet, that way she had of holding it, eyes bright, chin steady, like she was trying to stay inside the moment instead of past it. Murphy put his paw on my knee. I looked at the dog, then back at her. Nora Ashby, I said. I am asking, out loud. No distance, no management. I held her gaze. Will you marry me? She looked at the ring, at me, at the ring again. Then something in her face gave way, not collapsed, just gave way. The way tension releases when it isn't needed anymore. And she made a sound that was partly a laugh and entirely something more than that. Yes, she said, clean, direct. No ceremony around it, which was exactly who she was. I put the ring on her hand. She looked at it for a moment, turning it slightly in the light. Murphy pressed his whole face against both our hands with the complete commitment of a dog who considered himself a central participant in everything that mattered. Then she laughed. The real one. Full and warm and surprised, even though she must have seen it coming. And I kissed her under those same lights. The ones from the beginning, the ones that had been there for all of it, and when we pulled apart she was still smiling that smile. The one she stopped trying to do anything with and just let be there. Then she looked at me. For the record, she said, yeah, I knew you wanted to kiss me the night we hung these lights. I looked at her. Then why did you wait? She raised one eyebrow. Slightly, the exact eyebrow from the exact night. Because you needed to ask, she said. We got married in June backyard. Small, warm. The lights strung overhead, same lights, still burning, which at this point felt less like coincidence and more like they had simply decided to stay. Nora wore something simple and right that she had picked herself and refused to describe to me beforehand with the firmness of someone who believes in the integrity of a reveal. I wore a jacket she had chosen with the same authority she applied to color samples and design decisions. Murphy wore a bow tie he spent the first 20 minutes of the ceremony attempting to remove and then appeared to accept as a permanent feature of his existence going forward. Mrs. Pierce sat in the front row. Nobody had arranged this. Everyone had expected it. She provided a quiet but continuous commentary throughout the ceremony. helpful context, historical notes, and at least 2 unsolicited opinions on the vow structure that Diane later described as the single best piece of live narration she had ever encountered at any event in her entire life. Diane cried during the vows, loudly. She attributed it to allergies. She had been attributing this particular allergy response to the same cause since approximately 1987 and showed no intention of updating her position. We had written our own vows. Nora's were exact and specific and landed in the way that things land when they're true and well-aimed. 3 people in the back row cried who had not come prepared to cry. Mine were shorter. She told me afterward they were the best thing I had ever said to her. I am keeping that, the officiant said the words, and I stopped thinking in sentences. Just stood there in the yard under the lights with the woman I had watched from a careful distance across a fence for 3 weeks before I finally came through a gate and held a ladder and said mostly to be honest about what I wanted. Present, fully. For the first time in a long time, after the food and the toasts and Diane's speech, which closed on a line she had been holding in reserve for years and deployed with precision. Nora and I found ourselves alone on the patio for a moment, while the party continued inside and in the front yard. Murphy was asleep under the table with the absolute physical commitment of a dog who had given everything he had to the occasion and was done. The June air was warm, the lights overhead, the green door visible through the side gate, darker in the evening light, still exactly the right color it had always been. Nora leaned against my shoulder. I put my arm around her. We looked at the yard, the lights along the pergola, the plants along the fence that had come in fully now, green and deliberate, the gate between 2 sides of the same life, sitting open the way it had been sitting open for months. I was scared that first night, she said. I looked at her. Which night? The lights. She looked up at them. Not of you. Of wanting something again. She was quiet for a moment. After Garrett, I had put a lot of things down, not because I stopped believing in them, because I was tired of picking things up and carrying them somewhere they didn't fit. She paused. And then there you were. In your own yard, watering your own foot, trying very hard to look like you were doing something else entirely. I smiled, I thought. This is either exactly what I've been needing, she said, or I'm about to make a significant emotional error in front of a dog with no concept of discretion. Murphy, I said. Murphy. She glanced at him under the table. He was invested from the beginning. He has no boundaries. He has all the right ones. She looked back at the lights. He just applies them where he thinks they're needed. We sat with that for a moment. Then she said, I'm glad I didn't put it down. I looked at her, wanting things, she said. I'm glad I didn't put that down. I thought about the man I had been in May when she moved in, the one with the clean house and the empty Saturdays and the full commitment to the idea that fine was good enough. The one who had convinced himself that careful was the same as safe, that distance was the same as control, that a life without surprises was a life he had successfully managed. What it had been was a life on hold waiting, without knowing it was waiting, for a Friday evening and a tangled string of lights and a woman who looked over a fence and said the right words to a man who had forgotten he was worth saying them to. I have a confession, I said. She looked up. This sounds like it might be worth hearing. The morning after we hung the lights. When I went inside, I paused. I stood in my kitchen and looked at my walls. And beige, I said. Every wall. The most non-committal color I could find, and I had just called it neutral. She was quiet for a moment, then, Are you telling me you want to repaint? I'm telling you the house needed a decision. She laughed, sudden and real and caught off guard, the way she laughed when something landed in the right place. The way she had laughed under these exact lights the very first night we sat out here together. And then she settled back against my shoulder. And we stayed there, the party going on inside, warm and audible through the back wall. Murphy breathing slow and heavy under the table. The lights burning overhead the way they had been burning since a Friday evening in late May when 2 people sat in metal chairs and told each other the truth and didn't run from what came next. The yard was quiet now. The street beyond the fence, too. And I sat with my wife on the porch we had built together, not by planning it, not by deciding it in a single moment, but by choosing it over and over in the small ordinary hours until choosing became just the way things were, and something settled in me that I hadn't had words for until right now. The life I had kept clean and controlled and safe from anything that might cost something. I had thought I was protecting it. What I had actually been doing was keeping it from becoming anything worth protecting. This was the one worth protecting. The lights overhead, the green door, her shoulder against mine. Murphy's snoring from under the table, slow and content and utterly at peace with how everything had turned out. The night settled in around us, full and warm and real. Nora looked up at the lights for a long moment, then she looked across the yard. Then she looked at me, she raised one eyebrow. Slightly. Familiar, you're staring, she said. I looked back at her. If you want to look, she said. Same words, same voice. Warm and sure and unhurried. Just ask. I smiled. I'm looking, I said. I know, I plan to keep looking. She settled back against my shoulder. Her hand found mine on the arm of the chair. I know that too, she said, and the lights went on burning. Same lights, same yard, completely different life, the kind of life I had almost been too careful to live.